one of the fears is that people in power in Israel wanted Hamas to be in power in Gaza because they wanted an enemy that they could fight with impunity. That they could attack. Almost like they could justify what they really want to do, which is take over Gaza. This is the fear that a lot of the people that delve hardcore into conspiracy theories about. Like there's people that I've heard call it a false flag.
There's two different things. One is that they wanted Hamas to stay in control of Gaza, and one is that
because they would justify attacks, and that they would always have someone to attack. They would always have some reason to push forward.
I think it's weird. The things I've heard are two kind of conflicting theories. One was that Netanyahu wanted to keep Hamas in power,
right,
and was essentially paying them off. That's the
right.
idea.
He was funding.
Yeah, but the whole world was funding Gaza. The EU and America too, because we don't want people to starve.
Right.
But the idea was they're going to keep Hamas in place because Hamas is so scary and terrible, and everyone recognizes they're a terrorist organization, and they don't.
Unless you're on a college campus.
Right. And Hamas doesn't even pretend to want the two-state solution, whereas the Palestinian Authority is more moderate. They've become close, or seemingly come close. So if you're an Israeli prime minister against the two-state solution, the way that people have argued is that Netanyahu wants to keep the Palestinians divided. Palestinian Authority, Hamas here. This way, he'll never be pressured to do a two-state solution because Hamas doesn't even want it.
Right.
So that's the idea, is that Netanyahu wants to keep Hamas in power. And that was based on comments that he made at a meeting, although there was never a video of the meeting, but it seems like something he might say. So that was one theory. But then the other theory, which kind of conflicts with that, they can't really both be true, I think, is that Netanyahu wanted the attack to happen as a pretext to take over Gaza. Which I think makes no sense. I mean, the first theory is not crazy. It's not at all crazy that Netanyahu wanted to keep Hamas in power, so that, because imagine if Palestinian Authority and Palestinian Authority are here, they could link up and say, we want a state. And then
Right.
Netanyahu would have to be the guy saying no two-state solution.
Right.
But if they're divided, he never has to deal with that. What doesn't make sense at all is that he somehow false flagged the October 7th so that he could take over Gaza for two reasons. One, nobody has wanted to take over Gaza, not even Egypt. Nobody wants to run it. There's no strategic advantage for Israel to run it.
Well, if Israel occupies it, so if it's no longer Gaza, if it's a part of Israel, like Israel's
Right.
expanded its boundaries throughout its history, right?
Sure, but nobody has actually the Gaza Strip, and Israel is very focused on the West Bank. The West Bank has religious significance to Jews. They call it Judea and Samaria. It's where so many of the things in the Bible happened. So the Jews have an attachment to the West Bank. Many do. Even some secular Jews. Jews have no attachment to the Gaza Strip whatsoever. It's again, Egypt didn't even want it. Egypt occupied it for 20 years in the middle of the 20th century, and they didn't even want it back after their war with Israel because it has no strategic value, and it was more of a headache to manage than it was worth. Secondly, October 7th is basically the worst thing for Netanyahu's legacy ever. Everyone in Israel, his popularity has only declined because of this event, because he seemed to have let it happen. And the second the war is over, he's basically going to be run out in shame.
Well,
so why would he cause it?
Well, weren't they protesting him before?
Yes.
There was for months on the streets, thousands
Yes.
of people.
Yes, they were.
It was because he was trying to expand the powers of the court, right?
He was trying to diminish the power of the court.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, because the court in Israel kind of has power to check the right-wing government. It's almost the reverse of America, how we have a conservative court. They kind of have long story short, they kind of have a liberal court that can check the power of the right-wing party that Netanyahu runs. And so a lot of people disagreed about that. It's a whole long issue, but the left wing in Israel was very upset that he was trying to diminish the power of the court.
So if the left wing in Israel, if he's trying to diminish the power of the court so that he could get right-wing agendas pushed forth, and again, I want to be really clear. I'm not saying this is a false flag, but that would be if I was a guy that was inclined to do a false flag, I would justify my need to do whatever I needed to do to combat these people that were willing to do this thing. Now, I'm not saying not even a false flag, but allowing something to happen or knowing, having knowledge. I'm not attached to this at all. I don't even agree with it myself.
Right.
I'm just saying that this is like a concept that people throw around. Like,
so in counter to that concept, I would argue Netanyahu was elected just before this whole judicial reform thing happened. The fact that the left was protesting, it doesn't mean that Netanyahu was in kind of an existential situation. His base loved him. If anything, the protests fired up his base even more.
So it was kind of like the Women's March after Trump won.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It was bigger than that. I want to give it credit. It was bigger than that. It was dividing Israeli society more than that. But Netanyahu didn't, even from that situation, however precarious it was, his situation immediately got worse after October 7th because everyone blamed him. And it's only gotten worse in the past few months if you look at the polling on approval of Netanyahu. So if it was a false flag, it'd be the dumbest false flag in the world. And he's not a dumb guy. So there's no chance it's a false flag.
So the other conspiracy theory would be that they had foreknowledge of it, but they allowed it to happen. This is one that gets attached to 9/11 as well, right?
Yes, it gets attached to everything. And
of course.
But I mean, my thing with that is, if you're in a country like Israel, if you're the Mossad or the Shin Bet, you have Hamas, Hamas in Gaza, Hamas in the West Bank, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Iran, Houthis, and so on. And you're basically getting every single day, you're getting a list of 14, 15 different threats and plans on Israel, right? Some of them small, some of them huge. How do you distinguish between the ones that are likely to happen and the ones are not? This is a very difficult thing. It's not obvious, right? You use your intelligence. You try to have spies in all the Palestinian areas that are informing and so forth. But you're constantly getting signals of threats all the time, right? So to say they knew about it, is not the same as they might have gotten information about. They did get information about a plan to attack at some point. They didn't know it was going to happen on October 7th.